Yeah. Also, from tonight, we've got a different format of the weekly Zoom call. The aim is so that people aren't falling asleep. We're keeping the main presentation to 20 minutes. So we won't be taking probably less as like fast questions during the presentation. And then afterwards, it'll be opened for anyone who wants to ask questions. So tonight we're looking at, very briefly, because we could speak for hours and hours, about HMOs. So title is Unlocking the Potential in HMOs, which are houses in multiple occupation. And yeah, definition of a HMO, well, specifically in the UK, which is what we're interested about, is a property rented by 3 or more unrelated tenants who share facilities. So 2 unrelated people in a house doesn't constitute an HMO. It can still be a house share, but when there's 3 or more, that constitutes an HMO. And common examples are like student housing or professional house shares. Yeah, generally people that may be moving around or they're starting out in life. And yeah, potentially, someone to add in. Yeah, potentially don't have the funds or don't want to rent a complete place. It's, yeah, less expensive for people to rent a room rather than a flat, especially as like all bills are included when it's an HMO, which is advantage for the occupiers, can be a disadvantage obviously for the landlords. So sorry, just before, yeah, so yeah, when people are, as we just said, renting individual rooms, the landlord is paying the council tax, the utilities, internet, obviously insurance, water bills. So all that has to be taken into account. And we've got a slide a little bit later, which is raising the question BTL, buy-to-let, or HMO. And sometimes we have to seriously consider that if we use it doing small HMOs, and for example, 3 rooms, is it really beneficial to operate as HMO? As an aside, I operate half a dozen HMOs, and most of them are small, and we'll see that, well, what small ones are in a moment. So this classification, mini HMO, standard HMO, and large HMO, it's not like official government classifications where a government will say you're operating a mini HMO. The different classes are sort of in line with different standards and where we go from like one level to another. But it's not like clear cut saying this is mini, this is standard, and this is large. But this is how I classify them. And I think it can be useful in general. So a mini HMO is a standard house that we're operating as a small HMO. We've got 3 to 4 bedrooms. So from the outside, a mini HMO, yeah, isn't going to look anything different than a standard house. When we get onto a standard HMO, and we'll see why in a moment, we're talking about 5 or more tenants forming separate households. So even if, for example, we've got 4 bedrooms, but one of those bedrooms is occupied by a couple, and the other one's occupied by single people, that makes 5 people. And then we're in the domain of what we call standard HMOs. And well, I say these typically, it's not in fact typically, is mandatory licensing if an HMO has 5 or more people in it. So be careful of that. It's not a question of 5 bedrooms. It's 5 bedrooms if it's 1 person per bedroom. But if it's got 1 or more double bedrooms, it's as soon as you've got 5 people. And then we've got large HMOs, which are 7 or more bedrooms. What makes a difference here, in fact, as we'll see a little bit later, is the question of planning. Any HMO requires planning, but for HMOs above 6 bedrooms, it's a separate planning class and we're into what's called the sui generis planning class. It's no longer C4. And also, as we'll see, generally the large HMOs, when we're financing them or refinancing them when maybe we've added value or something, they're generally treated as a commercial investment and with a commercial valuation based on the income and a commercial yield. So mini HMOs, standard house operating as a small HMO with 3 to 4 bedrooms. This strategy maximizes rental income without requiring an HMO license in most areas. So it's possible to get a house, decide you're going to operate it as shared accommodation, and do that. Obviously, there are some constraints that we'll see in a moment. So we can get a higher rental yield, but be careful about the cost of the utilities and the different things. Smaller HMOs may not require the same compliances. There is some level of compliance needed, but not as much as the larger ones. So mini HMOs, we still have to have full compliance with fire safety. So even if you've got 3 bedrooms, that means all the bedrooms have to have fire doors, interlinked smoke alarms in all rooms, and emergency lighting in the corridors. Even if it's a little terrace house, we need to have all that. It's not necessarily a big deal doing it because if we're doing a renovation, we can do that at the same time. We might typically, if we've got a 3-bedroom house and we're renovating it to HMO standard, we might be adding a couple of thousand on the renovation bill because we've got fire doors instead of standard doors and a bit more electrics. Mini HMOs, utilities, council tax, all paid by the owner, so we need to take that into account in the calculations. And here we've got like a simple example to get a feel for things. So if we've got a 3-bedroom house converted into a 4-bedroom mini HMO, I mentioned that because quite often if we've got a 3-bedroom house, we've got 3 bedrooms upstairs, 2 reception rooms, then we'll quite often convert one of the reception rooms into a bedroom, making it a 4-bedroom mini HMO, and they can actually be quite lucrative. So in this example, we've got rents of £500 per month. So we've got £2,000 per month coming in, £800 costs, that's utilities, council tax and everything, and cleaner going in once a week. That is typically realistic costs for that size of HMO. So here we've got a net income of £1,200 per month compared to a similar house, for example, renting out at £800. So we've got an extra £400. So if our mortgage, for example, is £400 per month on that, we've got £400 cash flow as the buy-to-let and £800 cash flow as an HMO. Obviously, we're not taking into account voids and things like that. It's just a fast approximation. One point also on mini HMOs, I'm going to say theoretically, planning is still required because a residential house is C3 use class, and to operate as an HMO, even a mini HMO, it requires changing to C4 use class. A lot of people, in fact, operate HMOs without changing the class when they're small. I have done that in the past. I'm generally actually changing the use classes now via retrospective planning applications. In England, it's permitted development unless it's conservation area or listed building, then you can just apply, and so there's virtually no risk, risk of not getting the planning for that. Incidentally, planning and licensing is dealt with completely separately within councils. So if license are coming in to see if a license is needed, or it's also licensing will come in if, for example, a occupant in there gets unhappy about something and complains to the council will come in and make sure you've got the fire alarms and everything compliant. But if it's a license coming in, they don't care about, in reality, about planning. And planning is a separate thing, which obviously planning officers care about. Standard HMOs. So standard HMOs, I'm using the definition when I talk about a standard HMO as ones that require a mandatory license. When we say mandatory, because even for, I'm not going to go back to the previous slide, but on the small HMOs, if there's something which is called Article 4 in an area, then even if it's a small HMO, it still might require licensing. But there's a lot of areas where you can operate a mini HMO without licensing. So standard HMOs subject to mandatory licensing are shared accommodation with 5 or more tenants forming separate households. These do require HMO licensing, and generally these are near like universities, hospitals, where there's a good number of potential occupants. And obviously we've got even higher cash flow than for the small HMOs. The house is going to be more expensive, but the utility bills, if you've got a properly insulated house, aren't going to be massively more. We've got 2 extra bedrooms to heat. And yeah, if there's good demand, then these can be good cash flowing properties. However, we do have more compliance requirements. We've got all the standard fire safety. We've got minimum room sizes. Minimum room sizes actually do apply also to mini HMOs. Fire safety standards, generally, if we mandatory licensing, we've also got to do a fire risk audit, and that might potentially pick up other things. And we've got specific requirements as regards shared amenities, which translates to a specific, we need to have specific sizes of kitchens, additional surfaces or fridges and things like that, depending on how many people are occupying the HMO. So we have to be careful about that as well. Because it's mandatory licensing, we've got licensing fees, and we also have to do ongoing inspections, even in fact on a mini HMO, every month we need to go in or someone needs to go in and check, for example, that the fire alarm system is working properly, that there isn't any loads of rubbish accumulating in the common areas or things like that. So standard HMOs, and this practical example, 5-bedroom house, yeah, generating 2,250 per month. That actually is quite small. We can achieve easily like 3, well, on 5-bedroom, easily that, sometimes more. Then large HMOs. So here the difference that I'm giving for large HMO, or what sort of tips it over the balance, here is the question of planning. So doing a large, if we've got a large house and we want to, which is C3, and we want to convert it into a large HMO, there isn't permitted development because we're not going from C3 to C4. We're going from C3 to sui generis planning class. So yeah, that requires additional planning applications and planning work. However, large HMOs are generally treated as commercial investments, and that we can get a higher valuation than a bricks and mortar valuation. So large HMOs can be lucrative. Consideration, strict compliance requirements for licensing and safety. Not really stricter than large HMOs, but in almost all cases for large HMOs, because of the number of rooms, and they're going to be typically over 3 floors, then we no longer, with the interlinked smoke alarms, we have to have the proper fire panel call points and things like that. And also, as bigger the HMO, sometimes we're going to have to start having 2 kitchens or having mini kitchen on 1 level, and the requirements like bathrooms can't be more than 1 level from the rooms where people are staying and different things like that. So yeah, a lot more planning and higher expense when doing the conversions, but also potentially considerably higher income. But yeah, large HMO is much closer to a business than a property investment to buy it and forget about it. Then a few comments on buy-to-let or serviced accommodation or mini HMO. I'm saying that because in practice, and this is a thing that we quite often do when we're doing a renovation, either for ourselves or for a house that an investor has bought, we'll suggest to the investor, look, if you put in an extra 2 or 3,000, we can do the house so that it's fully compliant to operate as an HMO. We can do it so one of the reception rooms, we won't put an ensuite in there, so it can still be used as a reception room, but we'll put the fire door on, the alarm in there, and make everything suitable as an HMO. And then we'll say, obviously we'll have some idea, we'll say, look, let's maybe operate it as serviced accommodation on a whole house basis, where potentially we could get, if we're in a good touristic area, or if there's like a lot of major work on, so demand for contractors, we might be able to get maximum income from that. And then we'll say, well, if that doesn't work so well, or if the serviced accommodation dries up, but we've still, for example, we're near a university or we're near a hospital, we'll say, let's give it a go as HMO. And also obviously have the figures to potentially, if we've done it up to a nice standard, operate it also as a standard buy-to-let. Because having fire doors, as long as, for example, you choose fire doors that look like normal doors rather than look like sort of university dormitory doors, and yeah, do things like so that the emergency lighting is discreet. It is possible to have emergency lighting that are like LEDs, like the spotlight things. So it is, and so it can, and those nice solid doors are actually good for even for a family home. It gives like a bit better idea of quality, as long as you don't make it sort of look too much like an HMO. It can be fine for switching back. And yes, you need to carefully look at the figures, because if there's a high demand for standard buy-to-lets, maybe you'll get, where on the example I gave earlier with 812, 1,200, maybe on a buy-to-let, possibly able to push it a little bit and get up to the 850. And when you consider the 1,200, if utility bills go skyrocketing again, or occupancy goes down, you're going to be in between the two. So you might still, as a personal preference, go for stability of a long-term let if you've got a potential good tenant there, as opposed to operating as mini HMO. So it's not a question of like go with the wind or with the flow, but understand what is best at a particular point in time, and understand that this type of property can be flexible, a bit like a zip link bed. You can make it into a double or two singles with a mid-terraced house or a terraced house. 3 to 4 bedroom house can be done for both. This is a table which gives like a summary. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but we've got, buy-to-let and the 3 types of HMO, the number of bedrooms, number of occupants, fire safety, room sizes. Incidentally, on a standard buy-to-let, if you're buying a house that already exists, and it's got small bedrooms that are smaller than standard size bedrooms, you can still rent out that house. There's no problem. If, however, for example, you've got a 2-bedroom house that you want to convert into a 3-bedroom house, we like doing that to add value, then that 2-bedroom that you convert must be converted into bedrooms of the appropriate size. And then, we've got things like specific requirements for kitchen and shared lounge. On a standard buy-to-let or mini HMO, we don't have that, but as soon as we get to the bigger ones, we have that. And then the licensing, planning, and lending evaluations, again, buy-to-let, standard buy-to-let. Operating a property as an HMO, you have to tell the lender. It's not, you can't just switch from buy-to-let to HMO and not let the lender know. And when we're onto a large HMO, that's generally commercial. And yeah, more information. We are actually preparing a full HMO training package. So if anyone's interested in that, register for pre-release discount. We've got our portfolio building service, including sourcing and management of HMOs. We do HMOs for investors, and our deal analysis service, which is free if you present a deal, that we can analyze them together so that everyone can benefit from it. So that's the short presentation. I'm going to go back to the slide that gives the overview and open up for any questions for the next 10 minutes.
Trevor, just a question about the buy-to-let and the room sizes, right? So there's this nationally described space standards, right? The NDSS, right? That describes expected room sizes.
That's correct. And those sizes, by the way, are for new houses, and they're
Right.
larger than the minimum HMO sizes.
Okay.
So that
So
means if you're building a new HMO, you have to
yeah,
follow a single room, it's 7.5 according to the national standards.
yeah.
HMO, it's 6.54 square meters.
I think you answered my question. So it's for new builds, or
Correct,
actually,
yes.
is it does it apply retrospect? Well, I want to say retrospectively, right? That policy came into force 2015, right?
I don't know the exact date yet. So after that,
Yeah.
everything that was newly built after that came in should have those room sizes.
So is that something to watch out for if you're doing a renovation or refurb on something that was built after 2015? Um,
Well, hopefully you won't be doing a refurb.
yeah. But if you're, let's say, creating an extra bedroom, you might be doing something there, right?
Yes.
Um,
So there you must follow the new standards. So if you're creating bedrooms, there should be 7.5 square meters.
but only if the building was not in existence. Sorry, only if the building was put into place, built after 2015 or
That's
after that
correct, yes.
standard came. Right. Okay.
Yes.
So the key is to get those older buildings.
Yes. Well, we're
Right.
normally
So
doing stuff on older buildings anyway because we've got the higher added
yeah.
value.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Does anyone else have a question on something else?
Yes, I do have a question, and the question is regarding service accommodation and HMO. Do you need HMO license to operate as a service accommodation?
So as long as that serviced accommodation is operating as a full house, so you're renting out the whole house, for example, to a large family or a group of friends or group of contractors, then you don't need HMO license.
Right.
And
Okay.
that remains so on the planning, it's C3, and there's no license. Currently, there's no licensing required for serviced accommodation. Be aware that that is likely to change over the coming years, and governments are likely to put in place requirements for licensing of all short-term lets. And generally, and also there's likely to be, we have it in some areas in Wales, in North Wales, there's a C5 planning class, which is holiday let, and a C6 planning class, which is secondary home. So that means in those areas, if you want to buy a house and operate it as a holiday let, you actually have to apply for a change of use in planning from C3 to C5. And there's talk about those planning classes coming into England as well. But if you've got a house and you're already, before those planning classes come in, and so you've got a house at C3 and you're operating a serviced accommodation, when those planning classes come in, you would be automatically with grandfather rights onto C4 use class, sorry, C5 serviced accommodation. And if there's any proof required, then you do what we normally do, which is apply for a certificate of lawful development.
Just Trevor, on that new planning use class for service accommodation, what happens to the 90-day rule? Does that go away
Rule
because you're
specific to London boroughs.
or any that operates the 90-day rule, right? So if because they're doing that to limit how long you're running service accommodation in
In
a
reality,
residential
it was the
stock.
opposite. That 90-day rule came in place during the London Olympics to actually legally allow people with houses and flats to rent them out on Airbnb as touristic accommodation. But it was limited to 90 days. And that it basically was put in to remove a grey area as to whether someone who owns a home are allowed to rent it out. And it specified that they can rent it out for 90 days. So in reality, that clarified things, but also put a limit on things. So in all London boroughs where we've got that 90-day rule, then we can't rent out on short term for more than 90 days. Obviously, there are different ways around that.
But once a new use class comes in, you're basically selecting or moving building from C3 to C5, right?
Because in reality, in London boroughs, if someone wants to operate a property as permanent touristic accommodation, even like which will be considered in Brighton a standard Airbnb, you have to go to C1 use class. So there are blocks of apartments where there's like new builds where there's one floor which is C1, so that's for like tourists, short-term accommodation, and then or it might be one entrance that with all the flats from that entrance are C1, and then you've got another entrance where all the flats are C3, which are for standard residential. And so when or if the new use class comes in, then it will be needed to go to C5. So if you buy a house, for example, in I don't know, if you buy a house in Battersea, for example, and you want to rent it out all the time as an Airbnb, you can apply to the council for change to C1. You'll most likely get a refusal, but you can still apply. If you're building something new, so you're not like in inverted commas taking a house away from or potential house away from someone, and you say, I want to do these as service departments for touristic use, then you've got a higher chance of it getting passed.
Does that mean that the only service accommodation you should be operating in London right now is C1 use class?
If you're operating it for every day of the year, if you've got a house
I see.
and you're operating it on short-term lets for 90 days in the year, and for those other remaining 270 days, each letting is for 3 months or more. So you find someone that's come across from New York and needs to stay for 4 months for their job. You rent them out your house, and that's fine. That doesn't count in the 90 days. In practice, a lot of people are renting out a lot more than that because it's not policed. And in fact, it's only Airbnb that restrict the number of bookings to 90 per year. And obviously Airbnb isn't checking what when you rent it out on booking.com or on direct bookings and things.
Yeah.
I think Opie's wants to ask a question.
Yes, so it's regarding gas meters for HMOs. I've seen and heard some landlords put gas meter and electric meter for each room because they don't want a massive bill where the tenant haven't paid.
Yes.
What's your view on that?
Well, gas meters probably not, because we're not going to have a gas boiler for each room. However, electricity, I would strongly be in favour of that. And on new developments that we're doing we're doing one which we're currently in the planning stage. This would be a 6 ensuite bedsit HMO, and we're putting in sub meters for each room. So we haven't decided yet. We're probably even going to have it so that each room has got like a 100-litre hot water tank from their own electricity, or we might have a common boiler for that. We're looking at the costs and the different plus and minus. But in general, obviously, you have to state to the tenants that like if you're advertising on spare room, you need to state that bills are not included, or council tax is included, but not electricity. And when you put sub-meter in, there are certain rules and laws. Landlords aren't allowed to make a profit on the electricity from the sub-meters. So you have to bill that at the same price at which you buy it.
Thank you. Another question is about it's 7 plus bedroom plus property can be, you can do a commercial valuation on them. The pro is that the value, the market value can be really good, but does it have any disadvantages? High, for example, high interest rate, etc.
Sorry, say the second thing again that you said, please.
So benefits, pros and cons of commercial property valuation.
Yeah. In reality, yeah. The biggest obviously benefit is for the refinance. So that if, for example, on a bricks and mortar basis, the house was worth, for example, 250,000, and based on the actual rent that property is able to achieve and the local yield, you might end up getting a commercial valuation of 350,000, for example. So that then you can get back from the bank 75% of that 350,000. The only, so that means basically you're getting more money out of the bank, but then it's a question of what you do with that money, because that also means that if down the line, for whatever reason, that property could no longer be operated as an HMO and is only worth, let's say, becomes worth 280,000, then you're over leveraged on the loan, and the bank could potentially say you need to pay some money back. So yeah, you just need to do it like sort of very carefully. But I would say primarily because of that reason.
Okay, thank you. One final question for me is regarding selective license. Some councils have introduced selective license. What is the difference between selective license and HMO license? Please.
Yeah. What it means is, so if you look at this table here, I just need to move something out of the way, where we've got standard HMO and large HMO, it's mandatory licensing. So in other words, it's illegal to operate an HMO with 5 or more occupants without having a license. In the case of a mini HMO, we call it selective licensing, which means unless the local council has put in place an Article 4 directive, no license is required. But so it's not called mandatory across the country, it's called selective. So when someone is saying, is there selective licensing in, for example, Camden Town, what we're asking is, has Camden Town put an Article 4 directive which requires every HMO to be licensed? And for Camden Town, the answer is actually yes. So we have selective licensing. So there we have to apply for a license in exactly the same way as we apply for a license for a standard HMO. So it's not 2 different types of license. It's a question of whether we have to apply for one or not. So the fee for our license, if it's selective licensing and required, is going to be the same as the fee if it's mandatory licensing.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Let's have one last question.
Sorry, I've got a question if no one else is.
Yeah, go ahead, Monty.
Just a question about the valuations of the capital appreciation you can get on HMOs as opposed to your regular small buy to let. How would you what would you say is better? You know, where do you get better capital appreciation? Is it in HMOs or is it in your average small buy to let?
I would say in reality, when you're talking about capital appreciation,
Yeah,
you're thinking more about basically the value at which you sell the property over time.
yeah,
And in practice, when you've got commercial valuation, that's sort of what it's worth to an investor,
yeah,
but it doesn't mean that it's possible to sell at that let's say, higher valuation. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
yeah. Okay.
Um, and there's never going to be a risk with a standard buy-to-let that there isn't going to be someone who wants to live in it.
Yeah, it's true.
I would probably say at the moment, given the demand for houses in the
Yeah.
UK, given the fact that there's lots of students, professionals, and if HMOs are done to a nice standard,
Hmm.
I don't know what place you're living in, but probably if you got the choice of let's say a good sized HMO ensuite HMO room with a
Yeah.
nice like shared area kitchen, and
Yeah.
that you can spend less, let's say, I don't know, £400 or £500 less a month as
Yeah.
opposed to renting a flat. There's quite
Yeah.
a high chance that you go for that and keep that £500 to save up maybe for buying something
Yeah, exactly.
4 or 5.
Like I'm doing, yeah.
I mean, that's my logic in
I'm
that
in a
if it's a
9 bed
good quality
HMO at the minute.
HMO, it's almost the same, um, let's say, possibility of renting as a buy to let.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
market isn't suddenly going to dry up. If you've got an HMO in an area where you're only doing it for contractors and there's HS1 being built or a nuclear power station, for example,
Yeah.
then you're fine. You might well do it as a great investment
Yeah.
because for 4 or 5 years you can probably get really great rent on a property that you bought for nothing.
Yeah.
But you're not logically in 10 years' time, that's not going to be worth as much because
Yeah.
that demand might have dried up.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so generally I would say similar increased capital appreciation.
Okay.
Be
That's it.
careful of an HMO in an area where in 5 years' time it's no longer going to be an HMO or going to
Yeah, I
be
see what you
difficult
mean.
to operate as an HMO.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
Right, we're going to, no one actually sent a deal to analyze. So I've got one we're going to have a little look at. So I'm going to turn my, just need to find something. So if you give me 1 minute.
Trevor, if you like, I will. I mean, I've got a rough and ready spreadsheet where I can talk through um, the block of flats with the planning game, um, if you like, as well.
If you
So
like, yeah, we've got 15 minutes. So if you want to talk about that, we can have a chat about that one.
do you want to spin through yours first? Because it's probably slick and glossy and sexy, right?
Not really. It's probably in reality. We take
Right.
generally around 10 to 15 minutes anyway.
Right.
So it's either one or the other. If you're
Okay.
happy
All
to share
right.
yours, we can
Yeah.
have a chat
Yeah.
about
Let
yours.
me apologize everyone because this is going to be a little bit off the cuff. It's not really how I would have chosen to present it, but let me share. Let me just make sure I've got a window ready to share. It's going to be spreadsheet based. Um. Yeah. So let me.
I need to allow you to share that, Sal, so I'm going to do that.
Okay, I'm going to close every other window apart from the one that's relevant. and do a trick of not closing the relevant window. Okay. Trevor, I can just go for it, can I?
Yeah, go. Yeah, try sharing. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So send a
I need to
request.
press allow.
Right. Here we go. Can you guys see a spreadsheet?
Not yet.
No, it's loading.
Let me turn off my camera.
There we go. I
I've
can
got more
see
band.
now.
Okay, we can see now.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stop my video. Okay, right. So basically, this property that me and my business partner looked at, it's a block of flats, and the flats are 4 by 2 bedroom flats. Okay, and what was interesting about this proposition is a single freehold title that includes some land associated with it, on which there's 3 very large, substantial garages. It looks like the structure was intended to be something other than garages, like possibly 3 bungalows. But what they've got currently is 4 flats, and they secured planning permission for those 4 flats about 12, 13 years ago. Okay. And the freehold title includes a block of flats, includes the land. So when we looked at it, we were thinking that we would be able to do something with the land, with planning gain, and we could title split on the freehold. So I don't know if people are familiar with that strategy, but the premise is that if you have a block of flats as a single entity, you can raise the value without doing any building work, simply by splitting the title. So each individual flat appears as a lease in its own right. And what you're doing is you're increasing the accessibility. So a person looking for their first home, for example, could buy a 2-bed flat. Person looking for their first home are unlikely to buy a block of flats, right? So that's just an example. You get more liquidity, more accessibility. And if you do decide to hold, you can deleverage your financing by selling off 1 unit, 2 units, and so on. So we've thought there were a few different levers to pull. One of the other things that we did with this property is that we wanted to get a viewing, and we were struggling with the agent. So we just did a direct to vendor approach with a letter, and she got in touch straight away and was quite happy that we contacted her about how hard or not very hard her agents were working for her, and was quite happy to deal with us directly. So we opened up a dialogue about why she wanted to sell these flats. She'd just to give the very quick summary, she'd bought them with her husband some time ago. Her husband was the one that did all the work in relation to the planning application for the block of flats. She's aware that there was potential planning gain with the land, but she couldn't be bothered to do anything with it on her own. And effectively, she just wanted to be done with the hassle of looking after the flats. She's pretty close to retirement. She's of that sort of age. She does a lot of travel. So we were thinking, okay, so we've got title split potential. We've got planning gain potential. It might require a bit of time for us to line up those possibilities. So we were thinking potentially we could remove the burden of managing the block of flats with by leasing the block of flats. I'm going to use the correct terminology here, Trevor. I won't call it a purchase lease option, but we're going to lease the flats with an option to buy.
That's right. Yeah, these they're
Yeah.
two separate legal things.
Yeah. So to make sure the numbers stacked, I mean, we had advice, and the planning gain was the uncertain factor. So what we decided to do is to look at the valuation on the block of flats alone initially. Okay. And I've got the floor plans for the block of flats. But what we did is we basically got the measurements, and this is really rough and ready. So we got the measurements from, I mean, we had estate agents' measurements. They were really rough and ready. But Search Land and another trick, the EPC register, gives you the square meterage, which is really, really handy. Okay. And
Just one little comment about EPC square meterage.
yeah,
It is very, very approximate.
okay, it's good enough for us.
I've seen
For
EPCs that are like 10 or 20% off the real surface area. So we use it as an approximate when we're using things like property filters. Just one important thing to bear in mind is always have in mind what's the price per square meter that you're looking at and what's the average sold price per square meter in that area.
Yeah. So I'll come on to that. But yeah, so this was going to be a kind of high level kind of first pass, just to make sure that on the title split alone, we were trying to work out the value. So we got our square meterage, and we also tallied up the rent that was due on those block of flats. This is the asking price, which we thought was quite high, very, very high. And in terms of comparables, what I did is I went out and so my criteria is within a quarter of a mile within the last 6 months, what's last sold. And I relaxed that criteria, but at a maximum, furthest I'll go is a mile. And the furthest back I'll go in time is 12 months. Okay. So these you can see were all within the last 6 months, and they're all within a half-mile radius, roughly. And the two beds were generally of a size smaller, much smaller than the largest flat. So what I decided to do is do my calculations on the comparables based on price per square meter. And just for, because I'm a bit of a geek, data analysis, I chose to look at average, max, and min. So I could choose that in my analysis. So these are all last sold comparables. They're not estate agent marketed valuations. They're all explicit last sold.
No, you have to use last sold estate agent values. In general, when we're looking at this, we find estate agent values are 15 to 20% higher than the market prices, than the last sold prices. It'll depend on areas, but that is often what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So as an aside, if ever you've got a source of saying this is 20% below market value, and then saying giving for sale prices as market value, then generally run a mile, because for sale prices are not market value.
Yeah. So what I decided to do is work with the minimum as a worst case scenario, price per square meter, and use that to then extrapolate out what I understood to be the GDV, the value.
I'll just make one comment as well for you and sort of for everyone. You mentioned the fact that these are larger apartments. So you took the per square
Some
meter.
of them are, Trevor, not all of them, some of them.
Yeah. What my comment was going to be is, depending on the area, if someone wants a 2-bed apartment, for example, because of number of children, for example, they might, and they've got a budget, they might not care whether it's like 5 or 8 square meters more. And so it's possible that you wouldn't get that much more. So sometimes even if you've got something larger, we might prefer to focus on the sizes, on the actual prices of a 2-bedroom flat.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay.
the inverse as well, if we got something that's tiny, we're not
Yeah.
going to pretend that some two-bedroom flat that's 45 square meters, we're going to sell
Okay.
it at the price of a 55 or a 61. It sort of works
Yeah.
both ways.
Yeah. Okay. I'll bear that in mind. So basically, what we're talking about is perhaps the larger flat here. We'd be looking at a lower valuation then,
Yeah.
probably based on what I'd calculated. Okay. All right. Um. So, um, if I use that minimum price per square meter. I tallied up the prices of each individual flat, and you can see, sorry, I got it here. Oh yeah, you can see uh,
Is
these
that still
prices.
applying a discount to 25% below market value that you want to get it at?
Not yet, not yet. I'll explain the method to my
Right.
madness. Yeah, so this is what I've got based on a minimum price per square meter from the comparable. Okay.
Yes.
And then I tally all the calculated GDVs. So this is the price as if it's a leasehold comparable, right?
Yes, yes.
So you add them all up, and over here, sorry, that 376, sorry, not the 376, the 501, 101,000 is my GDV on the assumption the block of flats has been title split,
Right,
right?
yes,
Using the
based
minimum.
on recently sold prices.
Yeah, and I can flip the switch here just to look at average.
Yes.
Numbers look slightly better if I go to maths. But as you say, Trevor, I'll factor in what you said as a learning point that
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't really matter if it's a larger, if it's still a two bed, right? So you can see that there's still a significant difference between that valuation and the seller's asking price of 635,000, right?
Yes.
And the other thing as well is that on the assumption, the rule of thumb is that you uplift the value of an unsplit block by 25%.
That's right, yes. So you
This,
shouldn't be buying it. Obviously, you got the potential of the planning gain, but
yeah,
if you were considering only the existing building,
yeah,
then in reality, that 376 ought to be the maximum price that you're going to
yeah,
pay, unless
yeah,
you've got effectively a lease and option to purchase, in which
yeah,
case you could say, yes, I'll give you 450
yeah,
within 5 years.
yeah.
That could be
So
a good deal because, yeah,
yeah,
it gives you the possibility of not paying much at the beginning and no
yeah.
lending either.
So I'll explain the option valuation, but as we got into it, we actually pointed out to the seller that we'd spotted a deed on the charges register that belonged to the power company and questioned it. And she said she didn't know what that was. And we met her in face to face and we pushed the point and she said she would look into it. But she then started talking about some cable that was run through the land. And it turns out that 10 years prior, her and her husband signed a deed or granted a deed to a power company who ran a cable through the land that we were thinking we would do something on.
Yes,
And the easement, the rights are 2 meters of access either side of that cable.
yes,
And the other thing as well is that the planning approval on the flats was given um, on the assumption that parking spaces were provided to adhere to local planning standards. And
yes,
they specifically referred to the garages that we were either going to keep as structures and develop or we were going to remove and make use of. So our premise now is that the planning game is too uncertain. And we've gone back and notified the seller that we have looked at things and on balance we can't assume any planning gain and our offer is going to be
On the
based on
planning thing, one
yeah
comment, well, we need to finish in about 5 minutes.
yeah
One comment was, have you actually spoken with local planning consultants who know the
I've
area
started the
and sort of familiar with that?
yeah, I've started the conversation. Everyone we've spoken to said that's potentially an issue because the cable itself is not a planning issue. That's a conversation with the power company, right? And you know, rerouting the cable is quite expensive.
Extremely expensive, actually.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that uncertainty, it's the way we viewed it is it's time, effort, money to remove that uncertainty, and it's just not worth our while. So at the moment, we made it quite clear that we're prepared to make an offer, but the offer will be on the unsplit value of the block, and we've left it with her.
Yes.
But just so you can see what we're thinking, the unsplit value we calculated, as you said quite rightly, Trevor, the maximum we would offer is 376. We were going to offer 350 if we're buying today.
Yes.
And then I've done an illustration. If we were going to go down the lease option route, well, we might say, well, do you know what? We can give you 350 today because we do have money committed to other projects. As Trevor's aware, I'm doing something with HMOs in Sullyoak. Is that in a couple of years we could potentially offer more, perhaps 380,000. That's based on a 4% assumption of capital growth. So the idea is, okay, well, we can't really offer you as much as you might like, but every potential buyer is going to come across the same uncertainty about the planning game. And we'll just leave it with her. I mean, we've offered her advice as well, and she's aware of title splits, but again, these blocks are in her own personal name, so she needs to
title
navigate.
splits are actually quite complicated from a legal. It's quite, I can say, feasible to do, but it's not something that you can do without thinking about it.
Yeah,
And
well, we've got
title splits
solicitors
actually involve a transfer of title.
And we've got
Also, to
solicitors
be able
who've
to
done
do
it.
that and not pay SDLT twice, you need to do this
So
really
we've got
carefully.
solicitors who are familiar with that. We've also taken tax advice as well on that. So you're absolutely right. There's several disciplines that you need to line up just to bring it together. But it's if she decides to go for it, if she doesn't want the hassle and she decides, you know what, I recognize the difficulty other people have with the planning game, they're going to raise the same questions, and she wants to be done with the block for a period of time while we manage it in exchange for cash flow, we can offer her more. If she wants to go for a quick purchase now, we can say, well, this is what we can offer based on what works for us right now. But the big thing about this is one thing I learned is, as Trevor will be aware, I was quite excited about this deal at first, and I went a little bit lukewarm because when the planning uncertainty came to light, one of the exit strategies kind of essentially disappeared.
No, you need to do all the figures like you've done, and come to the conclusion. It seems quite reasonable, the offer prices that you've got on there, and obviously offering more with the option to purchase.
And then the key thing is it's not the only deal on the table, so we're looking at other deals. So having other things that we're looking at kind of helps with us not getting too emotionally invested.
And the thing with deals like that as well is you can park them and you can come back to the 6 months later, for example. And sometimes the owner will say, well, I've been thinking about it, or and we'll just decide to sell it.
I mean, we believe we built a quite good rapport with her. We understand what her motivations are, and we've not been kind of stern or strict or off or anything like that. We're just saying right now.
The only other, and I'll actually open it up in case anyone's got one question to ask or one comment. One possible creative solution here as well is what we call an assisted sale. An assisted sale is where you say to the owner, yes, you know that it's possible to do a title split, for example. If you're interested, obviously you can put in place the appropriate legal agreement. We can agree a base price of, for example, 350. We'll organise selling them with title split, etc., so that we might be able to aim to get, for example, a total of the 25% extra, and the uplift. So everything above 350 on the sales price, you could say minus, for example, the legal fees, would be split 50-50 between the owner and yourself, or yourself and your business partner.
I was I definitely think that's a great idea. I was thinking something along the lines of consultancy to guide
Yeah.
her through the process of the title split, where we would take a fee.
Yeah,
So
I mean, the thing
assistance
at
in
the
some
end of the
form, but
day is the fee is fine, but it's difficult to like sort of justify a fee that is like 20 or 30,000. Whereas if you're
yeah,
actually doing the work, and it's easy to justify and explain, look, we'll share 50-50 the uplift because she wouldn't be doing it
yeah,
without you.
yeah.
All right. Are there any other like questions or comments on this from the group?
No comments from me.
All right,
Sounds
okay.
like a very interesting deal.
Yeah.
We certainly learned a lot, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's the
Certainly,
thing as well. These deals are good, yeah, because here we've got like yeah, you thought about the title split, you've looked into potential planning gain and obviously looked carefully at the titles to find this the deeds which either the owner had forgotten about or was hiding, which it can be either.
yeah, I suspect it might have been conveniently forgotten.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, and talking and then yeah, looking at option to purchase and yeah, this assisted sale or consultancy.
yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think next week we're talking about title splitting. I don't
Oh,
have,
we
yeah.
I peaked too
So
early.
we'll have yeah, introduction to that.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I hope it was useful.
Great, thank you,
Yes,
Trevor.
indeed.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.